Hello everyone, my name is Bhavani Tilling-Barcher. I'm an associate in the Immigration Department for Russell-Cooke, and today I will be talking about how to apply for a sponsor license. Now this webinar is being recorded, and so you can watch it again, and if you would like to share it with a colleague or someone who may be interested in applying for a sponsor license, then you can do so. It can be accessed via the Russell-Cooke website and also the YouTube channel. Right, so let's begin. I thought it would be quite useful to go through some very relevant facts and figures. So to begin with, the number of EU workers that arrived in the UK to work in 2019 was 76,000. Now, this figure is very significant considering that it does not include EU nationals that came to the country just to reside and not to work. Also, if you think about what the figures may be like today, you can just imagine it's definitely increased. Now, the number of non-EU nationals that were on work-related visas in the UK in the year ending September 2019, that was 189,459. Now, of those, 59% were on Tier 2 visas, which definitely shows how popular and how important this visa category is for the UK workforce. Now, the number of EU nationals that are currently working in the UK, according to the ONS in August 2019, that was 2.37 million. So let's begin with what is a sponsor license. Now, the sponsor license will enable an organisation or a company to sponsor non-EEA or Swiss migrants to work for their particular organisation or company. Now, the company itself or the organisation itself is known as the sponsor. I'll be using this term quite a lot during this webinar. Now, in order to be able to sponsor non-EEA workers, the organisation or the company will need to obtain a sponsor licence by making an application to the Home Office. It's important to remember that from the 1st of January 2021, EEA nationals will also need to be sponsored in order to work in the UK under this new immigration system. A common misconception of a sponsor license is that it is only valid up to a period of 1 year. Now, this is not true. The license is actually valid for a period of 4 years and it can be renewed. So a company that wishes to sponsor workers under a particular route, which is either the Tier 2 skilled workers route or the Tier 5 temporary workers route, need to specify this on their sponsor license application. It's absolutely fine if in the future they want to add a particular category, they can do so. So why do you need one? Well, it's really useful to hold a sponsor license if you need to have access to a global pool of talent, especially because the UK unfortunately has a major skills shortage. So those businesses who require specific skill and it cannot be sourced from the UK will really benefit from the sponsor license. This is particularly common with large tech organisations or large medical organisations. Again, I reiterate that following the end of the transitional period, businesses would need to sponsor EEA nationals who did not start residing in the UK by the end of the year, so by the end of the 31st of December 2020. Those who have already secured their right to reside and work in the UK by applying under the EU settlement scheme will not need to be sponsored. Now, here is a breakdown of the categories. So you've got the most common category, which is the Tier 2, which is skilled employment. You have the Tier 2 general visa. That is when you want to recruit a skilled migrant from outside of the EEA because the job vacancy cannot be filled by a settled or a domestic worker. The other category is the Tier 2 intra-company transfers visa, commonly known as the Tier 2 ICT visa. This involves transferring an employee from one group entity to another. It's very common within multinational companies that would like to transfer their employees from one entity to another. Okay, then we do have the Tier 2 sports person and the Tier 2 religious minister category, which is self-explanatory. Then we can move on to the Tier 5 temporary worker or the exchange scheme category. This does not only include the temporary workers category, it also includes international agreement, seasonal workers, and the youth mobility scheme. But for the purposes of this webinar, I will be focusing on the Tier 2 categories. So let's really focus on what the key requirements are in order to apply for a sponsor license. So I'll go through each category in a little bit more detail. So let's go through the first requirement, genuine organisation operating lawfully in the UK. Now, in order for a company or an organisation to illustrate that they have met this requirement, they should really refer to Appendix A of the immigration rules. When you have a look at the Appendix A, it will come up with a number of tables, 1 to 4. Now, the specific table you need to look at will depend on what type of organisation you are. For example, if you are a startup, if you are a charity, if you're a corporate, it will really depend on what table you need to look at. Now, the table will actually tell you what documents are required and what documents you can rely on. So it's very, very useful. Now, the second requirement is, are you honest, dependable, and reliable? The Home Office will assess this by looking at the organisation's history and background and assessing the key personnel involved in the organisation. This usually will involve a criminality check. So the third key requirement is, are you capable of carrying out your sponsor duties and evidencing your compliance in a time frame and manner as set out in the UKVI guidance? Now, the Home Office will make an assessment of the current HR and recruitment practices to ensure that the business will be able to fulfill their sponsor duties. But it's also important to note that the Home Office can also visit you prior to the application being granted to actually physically see your systems in place and see whether you are able to comply with your sponsor duties if granted a sponsor license. Now, last but not least, the fourth key requirement is, if the migrant will be applying for a Tier 2 General or a Tier 2 ICT visa, then can the company offer genuine employment that meets the relevant skill level and appropriate rates of pay? Now, the key word here is genuine employment. So under the Tier 2 route, before the job can be offered to a migrant, it must be advertised to domestic or settled workers in order to give them the opportunity to apply. It's only if no settled workers are found, then the job can be offered to the migrant. So there are stringent requirements as to how the job can be advertised, and this is known as a resident labour market test, or RLMT. And there are exceptions to this, which I'll go through in a little bit more detail. But to begin with, it's important to note that when we refer to the relevant skill level for a Tier 2 application, the role must be advertised at RQ level 6 or above, which in essence means at graduate level or above. Okay. So before I go on to the next slide, I just wanted to focus a little bit on the resident labour market test. So what this in essence means is you would have to advertise the job to settled workers for a period of at least 28 days. You must place 2 advertisements, which is usually on 2 different websites. You must include all prescribed information, which is set out in the Home Office guidance, but it also includes things like the job description, the rate of pay, the job location. Okay, and it must also include a true salary rate. It's very, very important that sponsors remember that when advertising the job, they must keep a copy of the advertisement, including taking screenshots of the day it was posted as evidence that the job was posted for a period of 28 days at the least. And very quickly, some of the exemptions to the RLMT include if the job was on the shortage occupation list, whether the job is for a high earner, which means the job was advertised at a salary level of 159,600 or above, or for example, the migrant is continuing to work for the same occupation, so an extension application is being made, so there's no requirement to carry out RLMT. So I thought it would be quite useful to go through or outline the key procedure involved with making an application. It's not as simple as this, but it gives you a useful outline. So the first step would be to make the online application. Usually the most senior member of the HR team would make the application as the authorising officer. So once the application has been submitted, you would actually have to post the original documents to the Home Office. When I refer to original documents, remember when we went back to the requirements, the first requirement was to show that the organisation was a genuine organisation operating in the UK, and you would have to refer to Appendix A to ascertain which documents to send to the Home Office. Well, those are the supporting documents that you would have to send to the Home Office after the submission of the online application. Once you make that online application, you would also get a submission sheet which you have to sign. This will also be sent with the supporting documents. It's important to bear in mind that the application can take up to 8 weeks to be processed, so it's a really good idea to plan ahead. Now, if the company needs to apply for a restricted certificate of sponsorship, then an application needs to be made. If it is an unrestricted certificate of sponsorship, then no application needs to be made because you already have an allocation for that. I'll go through certificate of sponsorships in a bit more detail after a few slides. After this, you would actually have to assign the certificate of sponsorship to the particular migrant that you intend to recruit. Once the certificate has been assigned to that migrant, then they can simply apply for their Tier 2 visa. So you've got the sponsor license. How do you manage it? How do you adhere to your sponsor duties? Now, usually this is through something called the Sponsor Management System, the SMS system. It's used to carry out your daily task in relation to the sponsor license and sponsored employees. It's very useful because you don't have to make separate inquiries with the Home Office. You don't need to send separate emails. You don't need to make any further visa applications or applications of change of circumstances. It's all conducted under this SMS system. Okay. So you can effectively report any sponsor or migrant activity through the system, which includes applying for a certificate of sponsorship. Now, only key personnel will be able to use the SMS, and each person will have their own login details, which means not everyone from the organisation will have access to the SMS. So very important to remember, there are certain sponsor duties that you would have to adhere to, and effectively you sign up to it the moment that you are granted your sponsor license. So a bit of repetition from the slide before, let me emphasize that it will include monitoring the migrant and reporting any changes through the SMS system. The sponsor will also have a document recording and document keeping duties. This is again contained in one of the appendixes under the immigration rules, which is known as Appendix D. Sponsors must retain some documents to fulfill their sponsorship duties. Now, there's no real prescribed method of storing these documents, but you have to make sure that they are available upon request, just in case there is a compliance visit. Now, they can be retained electronically or through hard copy. But all of the supported documents from the sponsor license application must be kept for the duration of the license. So please ensure that it is kept in a really safe place. Now, as I keep going through the term key personnel, I'm assuming you all want to know exactly who are the key personnel. Well, once a sponsor license is granted, only the authorising officer, who usually is also the level 1 user, will have access to the SMS. They can appoint others to be the level 1 or level 2 user, and there's no real limitation on the number of level 1 or level 2 users you can have. So the authorising officer is usually the most senior person in the organisation who will be responsible for HR and recruitment of migrants, and will have overall responsibility of the sponsor licence itself. Now, the key contact is usually the legal representative. It's usually a person who will act as the main point of contact when liaising with the Home Office, which is why it's a good idea for a legal representative to be the key contact. A level 1 user will be responsible for the day-to-day management of the SMS system. You can have more than one level 1 user, but it's not advisable to have too many because it will be hard to control how many people use the SMS system and what actions, to monitor what actions have been taken and what actions are still outstanding. Now, a level 2 user is someone who will have limited access to the SMS and will have limited functions. So some people or some organisations do not have any level 2 users, but some do as a backup. So a certificate of sponsorship, you can either have an unrestricted certificate of sponsorship or a restricted certificate of sponsorship. You have to apply for a restricted certificate of sponsorship in order to sponsor migrants from outside of the UK. As mentioned previously, with unrestricted certificates of sponsorship, you will already have an allocated number. Therefore, you can simply go ahead and assign these. They are often for migrants who are already in the UK, such as a Tier 4 student migrant who would like to switch over to a Tier 2 visa, or a dependent of a points-based system migrant, or even someone who is a high earner. So once a certificate of sponsorship has been assigned to a particular migrant, then they can go ahead and apply for their Tier 2 visa. So a very, very important topic, and it can be quite a daunting topic, Home Office compliance visits. It's important to note that a Home Office representative can visit you before a licence is granted or even after. A change of circumstances may also warrant a visit. Also, if a licence is being renewed, it may also warrant a visit. They can be announced, and unfortunately, they can also be unannounced. Essentially, it is an on-site immigration audit where documents may be requested, systems may be checked, and HR personnel or migrants may also be interviewed. So it's important that everyone is fully aware of what a compliance visit may entail. So once a sponsor license is granted, it will be graded. It will either be graded as or rated as A or B. The best rating would be if you are rated as an A-rated sponsor, because it means you are complying with all of your sponsor duties. You have the added benefit of being able to certify maintenance for your migrants as well. Now, B rating means that unfortunately you have failed to comply with some of your sponsor duties, and there may be some breaches, and therefore you will have to follow an action plan within a specified time frame to upgrade your license. Unfortunately, a license can actually be suspended or even revoked if there are significant breaches of the sponsor license. So what can you do to prepare yourself now? You can review your recruitment plans and strategies. You can see how many EU workers you currently have in your company. Have they applied under the EU settlement scheme? How many are you intending to recruit in the future? You should really make a plan over the next 5 years to assess how many workers you need to employ and assess their skill level. Is there a possibility that you may not be able to find the appropriate talent in the UK due to your particular field, and therefore you may have to sponsor a migrant from outside of the UK, which includes EU workers from next year? So it's beneficial to start getting your documents ready if there is a possibility that you may have to apply. Remember that even though a license is valid for 4 years, there is no requirement that you have to sponsor a migrant as soon as your license is granted. There are many situations or organisations that I know personally that have only sponsored one migrant in 4 years, but that migrant is so beneficial and so valuable for that company that it makes it worthwhile to may have made that application. So some top reasons for refusals. In my experience, these are probably the most common that I've come across. So let's please learn from them and try not make these mistakes. So one of the most common reasons is that the resident labour market test was not carried out properly. Now, if you are intending on sponsoring any migrants this year, then please ensure you get some advice in relation to how to carry it out, or really read the Home Office guidance, because it is very detailed and they have provided a lot of information in the guidance. So another reason is that the job vacancy was not considered to be genuine. I'll give you an example of this. There's a tech company that is intending to sponsor a psychologist. Now, this seems very unrelated to the field of work that the organisation is currently in. However, I mean, if you can provide justification as to why a psychologist is required, then this might be considered to be genuine. But in that example, there was no justification, so the job vacancy was not considered to be genuine. So sufficient Appendix A documents were not provided to evidence the organisation is genuine. I mentioned this was one of the first requirements for a sponsor licence. So again, it's very important to have a look at the tables to see what are the required documents. So internal HR systems are not robust enough to enable the organisation to meet their sponsor duties. It's really important that organisations do regularly review the HR systems and how easy they are to use. Lastly, one of the top reasons is a failed Home Office compliance visit. As mentioned, the Home Office can visit you prior to the application being granted, so always be prepared. Fortunately, there are some very welcomed changes from 2021 when the new immigration system is implemented. So the Tier 2 category will be rebranded as a skilled worker visa, where 70 points are required. But of those 70, 20 are tradable, so there is an element of flexibility. The annual cap of 20,700 certificates of sponsorship, which are restricted certificates of sponsorship, will be removed. This indicates the government's change in attitude to encourage more skilled workers to enter the UK. Now, there will be a reduction in the skill level from RQF level 6 to RQF level 3, which means it will be reduced to around A level or equivalent. So the standard minimum salary level is also being reduced from 30,000 to 25,600. And fortunately, the resident labour market test will be abolished. However, it's important to emphasise that the genuine vacancy requirement still remains. So let's all do it right the first time. Here are some of my tips to assist you. Please get legal advice or assistance in carrying out the RLMT correctly if you intend to recruit any migrants this year. Of course, next year it will be abolished, so hopefully it will make things a little bit more easier. Ensure all your key personnel understand how to use the SMS by ensuring they receive adequate training. Sometimes they are aware of their duties, but they are unaware as to how they can report a certain activity. So it's important each and every one of them do understand how to use it. Sponsors must ensure that they have a thorough understanding of the document recording and the document keeping duties. Please ensure that you do have adequate checklists in place so it's easy for the key personnel when they're recruiting a particular migrant, and they know what pieces of evidence that they need to retain on file. Conduct regular mock Home Office audits to ensure your HR systems are adequate and robust. I cannot emphasise on this enough. It's so important to be prepared for the unprepared. So it's really useful if at times you can get a company to come in to conduct a mock audit, to check through your systems so that you can receive feedback as to how you can improve your own internal systems. Lastly, but not least, ensure you have adequate internal systems to monitor migrants and retain key documents in a confidential manner. It's important to remember that not only you have to retain these documents, but you have to protect your migrants' confidential information. So I hope this webinar was useful for you all. If you do have any questions, then please do drop me an email or give me a call. I'll be happy to discuss this further with you all. Thank you very much for listening.